Is cryptocurrency an overhyped technology? Has education been fundamentally broken by artificial intelligence? How does one stay consistent and motivated after 12 years of podcasting? Should you stay in school or launch your first startup? All of this and more will be discussed in this 61st edition of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast starring Henrik de Gyor. And it starts right now.
What is the difference between a speaker and a doer?
A speaker is someone who explains things. A doer is actually someone who executes it. So I'm both, but I've been a doer much longer than a speaker, to be honest.
For sure. And you've been podcasting for 12 years, if that's correct. That's just, 12 years ago, I was 10 years old, just to give us some perspective on that time. So just for the starters, how have you stayed consistent and motivated with this pursuit and not burnt out?
Well, one way is to pay attention to your audience and what if they're consuming what you're putting out on a consistent basis. Of course, also being consistent on how often you push out your content, especially your podcasts. So there's usually a cadence, weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever that cadence happens to be. Some of my cadences have changed over time, just for a variety of reasons, and making sure you give them enough time to consume. I've seen people put out podcasts every day or every week, and then also how long you put them out, or how long the actual episodes are. I don't do long form. Most of my podcasts have been 5 to 15 minutes long, because I understand that patience is decreasing and expectations are only increasing at different rates. And so I put out very to the point podcasts with very little, I'm going to call it fluff, and just pure content that is consumable, question answer, like what we're doing right now.
So it's more like quality over quantity in that sense. But how did you figure that out? Was it a lot of trial and error? And what kind of time would you give or would you recommend someone take in order to figure that out for their audience and for their niche?
I don't think patience is really changing, honestly, and expectations are still only increasing.
Yeah, for sure.
So we all know podcasters who do 3-hour episodes and things like that, and they're very, very in depth and very, very informative. If you really, really want that deep dive into that interview, but not many people have that much time to consume that. To spend 3 hours listening to one single podcast. So unless it's extremely in depth and like one time in a lifetime, interview with somebody that's going to be like instrumental and groundbreaking, etc., which sometimes it is, for the people that we know that do those long form podcasts. But what you notice also is those same people that put out 3-hour podcasts put out a similar podcast with 5-minute clips. So that tells you something.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking about, the clips. We see Lex Friedman, Andrew Huberman, they always putting out, 3 to 5 to 7 minute clips. And so, yeah, that answers my question.
Exactly. Same with Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss was, of course, the OG of that, a long format, at least, that I remember. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that. Those clips are very helpful, just to even get into that, person or that niche or something. There's just the bite size.
Yes.
So speaking of the niche, I mean, once you've picked it and you've started in that, how do you continue to innovate it and not let the ideas run out?
I think it's a matter of who you're reaching out to. So I do interview format. So I interview a different individual in every single episode. And the way I've done it is I have a system where I reach out to people on a cyclical basis, usually a few times a year, sometimes even once a year, where I reach out to hundreds of people and see who's interested. And not everyone will be. That's okay. I don't take it personally, and you shouldn't either. Where you reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'd like to interview about topic X," and if they are, great. And then I send them the questions in advance. I tell them the format, how long it's going to be, what's it for, who's it for, etc. Give them previous episodes to listen to so they can understand the format, similar to yours or mine, and have them consume it and understand what's it for and who's it for, right? And then also what I do is once I send it out to them, I make sure that they can review the edited audio. That's just something I do. You don't have to do that, but something I do to send it out to them so that they have a reassurance of, oh, I can hear what was edited from what I said, and making sure this is what I want to be released out there publicly. And that's another reassurance, especially since I don't know 99% of the people that I interview. And that's okay. So it's getting out of your comfort zone and interviewing people that are of interest. So we didn't meet much before this interview, and that's the whole point is keeping it fresh, keeping it honest, and interviewing new people for new perspectives, new lenses, if you will, and getting interesting interviews and interesting content for your audience.
This next question is quite comprehensive, but it seems like podcasting is kind of becoming trendy or became kind of trendy after COVID. You know, people were in lockdown, they needed just something to do and they started podcasting. How do you know, let's say you're just starting out or you're thinking about starting out, how do you know if podcasting is a fit for you, you know, without spending all the time, money, and energy on equipment, software, spending all the time trying to get people on the podcast? How would you know initially if you're built for this kind of interaction online?
Sure. Yeah. So I think individually, it's a choice, right? Are you willing to spend the time on a particular show, you know, on a cyclical basis, right? And keep doing it until the audience doesn't appear anymore for whatever reason, and that might be because you have to shift something or change something, um, uh, or if the topic is stale, for the lack of a better term, or you're not engaging the audience the right way. So it's a matter of all those things, and it takes a little bit of time to get your feet wet, honestly, and making sure that you have a few episodes under your belt. The challenge is, to your exact point, most shows don't make it past 12 to 18 months, and that's fairly common. 12 to 18 months, or sometimes even 10 episodes, and they fade away. And there's, I think, there's about 2 million shows out there. But
Okay.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but not many of them continue, you know, past 18 months, let's just say, for a variety of reasons. And I'm not talking about most of the shows that are like existing media that create a podcast in audio form of their media, but of actual individuals like you and I and other people that are basically creating new content, fresh, unique content that is not recycling someone else's, for lack of a better term, because that's easy
Right.
to do. Yep.
Right.
So it's important to be consistent. It's important to know that you need to be consistent in order to maintain that audience, because they expect your show, especially if you tell them, right? Oh, you should see my show every month, or every Monday, or whatever, or every Tuesdays and Thursdays, or whatever that looks like, right? That kind of thing.
Where does passion factor into this? Would you like what's more important, just being consistent or having a passion for it? Just off the top of your head.
I would say consistency and curiosity.
Mm,
So curiosity, it should continue to scratch that itch. You should continue to be able to scratch that itch of curiosity, right? So that is passion to a degree, right? Passion is involved with curiosity, but you don't want to get carried away with it. You want to make sure that it's still engaging with other people, and the only way to know is to put it out there, right?
right.
Because you need to just put out more content on a regular basis, on whatever that cadence is, weekly, monthly, again, and making sure that people are engaging. And you'd be surprised that it's really content driven. It's not necessarily who you have on the podcast. So
Right.
you don't have to aim for celebrities. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I mean, if I were just to give just a quick bit of advice to any Gen Z or any person to start a podcast, is just press upload. That's the main thing. It's such a nerve-wracking experience recording your first podcast, but it's even more nerve-wracking and just anxiety-ridden actually pressing upload and then thinking about all like the feedback and the criticisms and the social experience from that. But
Mhm.
like if you could go back 10 years or 12 years rather, what advice would you give to yourself in terms of how you would progress in this podcasting arena?
Yep. I would say early on, don't pay attention too much about the analytics. You may not get any, interestingly enough, right? Because there's
Right.
way too many shows out there, and it is about marketing, right? And marketing your show, making sure that your audience knows about it, right?
Right.
In whatever form, and it doesn't have to be just social media, not just in most of the podcasting channels, right? Because everybody knows about Apple, everybody knows about Google, everybody knows about Spotify. Those are just a few. There's plenty of others that we're not mentioning here that you have to be on in order for the world to pay attention to it, because there is no such thing as a local podcast by definition, right? Even if you're talking about local things, it's there's going to be an interest somewhere else about that thing that you're talking about.
Right.
So don't pay attention too much about the analytics. Take all feedback and comments with a grain of salt. You're going to get a lot of spam, sadly, right? And so make sure you use spam filters.
For sure.
It's going to be completely irrelevant to your show, not of any use to anyone ever, right? So ignore all that stuff, and just make sure that the few comments that come out that are actually of use to you and or your audience, and make sure that you filter through them properly. So don't take criticism as like boilerplate. Oh my God, I'm doing horrible because I have one negative comment. That's irrelevant, honestly.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Take it with a grain of salt. See if it has any merit, right? The comment that it itself, not the person, has any merit, and filter as necessary. I delete plenty of comments out there because they're trash, honestly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I only release the comments that have any value to the audience, not bashing my interviewee or whatever that is, whatever happens to be, or the show itself or whatever. Because that's probably not very helpful to anyone, honestly. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
filter quite significantly if necessary, and then don't be swayed by, oh, I only had X number of views, single or double digit views this time. It's like, okay, well, if you're growing, that's might be normal, if or daily for that matter, or even sometimes monthly, depending on how well or how poorly you've marketed your show. Because if you're not marketing your show, if you're not pushing it out there, saying, "Hey, I have a show about XYZ topic," and making sure that the marketing copy, which is now easy if you use the right tools out there that
Yeah.
we'll be talking about shortly. But
Sure.
it's very easy to have that marketing copy edited properly, if you will.
For sure. I mean, just going back to the negative comments, that's also kind of like it's almost insurmountable because people don't want to be criticized and they also don't want to be criticized by anonymous bots that say the worst things about you. And
Mhm.
it's like, we're not built for that. And how did you, so first of all, my first question is, how do you filter that? Because you have to not only consume all of it, but then you have to also internalize it, think about if it's beneficial, and
Mhm.
then decide to delete it or to keep it. And
Yep.
that takes a lot of pressure,
Right. Sure.
So
Mhm.
how did you go through that? Or
Sure.
how do
Yeah.
you go through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do is I typically record a whole bunch of episodes at the same time, and then I
Okay.
schedule their cadence, weekly, monthly, whatever that is, right? And then I release it, and then maybe 6 months later, I might look at the comments and questions, or a year later,
Ah,
right?
interesting.
Because then when I try to do new episodes, I can take that feedback if there is any, and by that time there will either be some or there won't be some, right? And then you filter the trash, right,
Hmm.
to the valued nuggets of like, oh, I love more episodes talking about or deeper diving about whatever, right, that kind of thing. And you take that feedback and say, oh, okay, so maybe three people said that. Great. Okay. That means I should probably look into deeper dives or different questions or whatever that looks like. Make sense?
So absolutely. So just give it some time before you're actually looking at it. So don't read comments on your most recent content
Yeah.
from a week or a month ago.
No,
That's
no,
very
no.
beneficial. That's
Exactly.
very helpful.
Because then you're pausing every time, right? If you're like, oh, I got a comment this hour, it's like maybe I
Yeah,
should change the thing right now. It's like, no.
yeah, yeah. It induces a lot of anxiety in you.
Yeah,
And you know,
exactly.
I guess it's a new term like a digital anxiety because you
Sure.
want to
Yeah.
reshape your entire social media presence. Yeah, I've gone through that too. It's not fun. So I'll
No.
start implementing time.
Yeah.
Um,
It is about consistency, and if you
yeah,
continue being consistent, even if you're slightly wrong, that's okay, right?
yeah,
Because people want more of this versus more of that, right? That's okay. So just keep pushing what you originally thought was right, and if you're not getting the audience necessary, right, and you're going to record new episodes, then you know what to change, right, prior
sure.
to recording new episodes.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things about podcasting is the education that comes with it. You know, so you're specializing in 5 to 15 minute education. Some people like long form content to educate themselves. Just speaking of education, where is it failing, and is artificial intelligence disrupting or forcing an overhaul for education?
It is forcing an overhaul, but it is failing as well at the same time.
Okay.
It's how the education system accepts or denies or refuses to accept AI. So it's on one school of thought is to not accept it and decline it and suppress it as much as possible, right? And ignore it as because it'll go away. No, it's not. The genie's out of the bottle, and
Yeah.
it's coming. It's coming full bore at us. The other school of thought is embrace it, learn how to use it, even if you're not using it properly. A lot of people try to use like ChatGPT, like Google, right, or Bard, right. They're trying to use the tool just like the search, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You have to be much more creative and much more um, um, specific about
Yeah.
how you're asking your questions, and then how to get the proper output that you want. And that you only learn to use those AIs, right? Whether it's text to text, text to image, text to video, text to whatever, and then the future iterations of AI that we'll have much more engagement with by using it. And that's the
Yeah.
only, not by hearing how people use it and fear mongering over it because it could do that or it could do this. That's not helpful. Using it yourself is the only way you're going to be proficient in it, right? It's not by pulling out the manual because there isn't one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It changes every 2 weeks, literally.
Yeah. So would you recommend schools to create like a kind of ChatGPT course or ChatGPT class and adopt these technologies? ChatGPT is just one
Yeah,
of the many
one
chatbots.
tool. It is.
Um,
Yeah.
but but there is absolutely, and I agree with you, there is value to using it.
Mhm.
But the problem is that Gen Z in particular are just using it blindly, understanding the consequences of using this to write an entire essay, but you don't know exactly what it wrote, and you also don't know how to write now, you know? And so, just I guess your initial thoughts on how would an educational institution go about creating a ChatGPT course? What should they focus on? Or even how should a Gen Z begin to learn to use ChatGPT to aid them and not dilute their education?
Right, right. Because education, a lot of it has been generated around educating factory workers, as it has been since the
Right,
1950s, right, or
right,
before that. And now it's evolved. It's very, very glacially slow evolving, to what people might need someday, right? But they rarely evolve to like today, right? What the job market is working on today, what employers need today, right? Or tomorrow, more importantly, right? So companies need to tell people like what they need, right? Companies need to tell schools, hey, we need to be able to hire people with these skills. Can you
mm,
train more of them? Because we'll hire them immediately, straight out of high school, straight out of college, straight out of university, whatever that looks like. And the embracement of that is how you learn at I'm going to say almost every age level, if you think about it, especially for Gen Z, because Gen Z, for the most part, is mostly in school, right?
Mhm.
And if you embrace it and you allow it within, the I'm going to call it guardrails of parenting, etc., so that you don't have it do your homework unless that is your homework, because the main thing that you get caught on is if ChatGPT or Bard does your homework, right?
Yeah.
A, you don't learn, number one, and B, it's consistent and you're not. That's just
Yeah.
general from a human. Humans are not consistent. Machines are. So if you magically one day become super consistent in your answers, you're gonna get caught, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't work that way. So
Mhm.
you need to embrace that. You need to practice it, and use it, and making sure that it's helpful to yourself, by getting the right outputs and massaging the question so that you get the right answer that you want. That
Sure.
answers your.
No, absolutely, it does answer my question. I'm just thinking back to this magical tipping point where you just become good at something. It's similar to when I was in Spanish class and people would just start using Google Translate, and suddenly they're just fluent in Spanish, and the teacher's like, "We clearly know exactly what you're doing." So just as an analogy, that was just,
Mhm.
it just in my head, that's when it clicked.
Exactly. And
Just
these are
speaking
helpful
of,
tools to your point, right? They're helpful
yeah,
tools. And they should be used as tools, but they're
yeah,
not a replacement for your knowledge. Because
yeah.
if you don't have internet access, if you don't have cell coverage, the tool isn't very helpful, is it?
Sure, sure. It does also speak to the stagnation of education, as you alluded to earlier. It's bizarre that these tools have caused such a seismic shock. And it goes to show that there needs to be not just incremental, but an entire overhaul for the curriculums and what people are learning. And again, if the curriculums can incorporate ChatGPT and other kinds of systems, I think it would be beneficial. But still, speaking of school, one kind of trend, I guess you can call it, for Gen Z is actually not going to post-secondary. They're skipping it entirely. And even people, or magnates like Peter Thiel don't recommend post-secondary, or academia in general. They just, I think the Thiel Foundation gives you 100,000 if you get into an Ivy League, but they give you 100,000 to build your own startup to not attend, or something like that. What would you recommend a Gen Z who's maybe in grade 12, thinking about pursuing some kind of post-secondary, but also interested in startups? What would you recommend that curious Gen Z?
Yep. So you can take a break between high school and college, to your exact point, right? Uh, Whether you want to go into a trade school, whether you want to do a startup, whether you want to take a break and explore the world or whatever that looks like.
Sure.
And that is sometimes highly recommended because you're going to have a better perspective on things than just going from school to school, right? And granted, high school is very different from university, but we already know that.
Yeah,
Or you will explore that very soon
for
for the
sure.
audience. And the thing is, what are how much comfort zones are you comfortable with? Like, if you're really comfortable in being a school environment and having that structure, let's just say, and you want to retain that and have low risk, let's just say, because you're just going to go continue going to classes just at a different time, and the workload's going to be slightly different, and you're going to study different things, and you're okay with that, then continue going into school. Because especially if you have a path like doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc., that kind of thing, where you have to
Sure.
have it. There's no doctor, lawyer, engineer alive today, at least, that is, especially in the United States or Europe, for that matter, that doesn't have that qualification and those certifications and etc.
Thankfully.
Yes, exactly. So if you're not interested in those things and you're contemplating starting your own business because you have a great idea that you're willing to execute, and the execution is the hard part, not the idea. The ideas
Mhm.
are a dime a dozen, honestly. Um, it's the execution and the figuring out how am I going to make this and put this out to the world, and how people will notice it and buy it, right, and use it, etc. So, and continue to use it, preferably, right, or
Sure.
continue buying it if it's a repeat purchase thing. Um, and basically, it's a matter of figuring out if I'm okay with high risk, breaking all my comfort zones on a very regular basis, very different and very difficult emotional states where it looks like this on a daily basis, right? Um, then yes, you could explore startups, because that it's like that. It's very difficult. It's very stressful. You have to be pulled in many different directions. Not everyone is like Bill Gates. Not everyone is needs to be even like Mark Zuckerberg. Those are outliers, right? Those are the few and the rare, right? That are billionaires, that make it, that do this, and they did it from their garage, and then suddenly, as a Gen Zer, and now they're either retired or thinking about retirement already, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a matter of looking at what are you comfortable doing, right, going forward, because a lot of people are not comfortable breaking their comfort zones at all. And I would recommend that they do challenge those comfort zones on a regular basis. I don't mean necessarily doing startups, because you can study business in school. And one of the most popular school classes, interestingly enough, in universities is entrepreneurship, interestingly enough. Now, it's teaching entrepreneurship. It's not teaching you to be an entrepreneur, because you have to be entrepreneurial, right? Willing to go out there, right? And push you out there. But it is pushing those comfort zones to a degree. And I would recommend that they do push comfort zones on a regular basis if startups are of your interest, just to get your feet wet and get it out of your system at the very minimum. Making sure, do you want to work for someone, or do you want to work for yourself, right? And build something really interesting, really special, right? That the world really needs. And if the answer is no, and it's like, no, I want to just go to school, get a degree, get a job, have a family, no, etc., then startups may not be the right thing for you.
Well, one thing among many things that you said that was very interesting was everybody. Well, I mean, it echoes what Sam Harris once said. He said that everybody has a million great ideas each day, but not everybody is able to execute them, or not everybody wants to execute them. And that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people, whether they want to write a book or start a company, it's all a great idea in their head. But the most difficult part is, okay, register the domain, figure out a business plan, you know, work at it for 18 months, spend 12 hours a day at it, 80 hours a week, do it constantly, then go through those emotional turmoils and all of that. So I guess as general advice, what would you tell a Gen Z who's in that frame of mind, wants to start a business? How would you kind of give them the cold start?
Yep. So again, in the startup world, there's no grading, right? School
Yeah.
world, everything's graded, right? A through F, right? With that kind of thing. And in the real world, aside from certifications or recertifications, there's no such thing. Most of it is just pass fail if it's a certification, and you're just given a bonus or you're given a raise based on your performance or the company performance, more importantly, and that's it. Um, and so that changes. That's a big difference between school and business. Comfort zones, again, back to that. You want to challenge those when it's appropriate. If you work for someone, they challenge comfort zones less. If you work for yourself, you have to challenge comfort zones all the time.
Every day.
Exactly. And then something else I want to introduce is VUCA, VUCA, right? So VUCA is an acronym, of course, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Basically, change, right? Constant change. Some people call it chaos, right? And if you're comfortable in working in those environments, you're going to be very adaptable. And adaptability is really important today, because we live and work in VUCA times. more so than ever before. And if you're adaptable and you can thrive, not just survive in VUCA times, now, then you're very hireable, or you're very wanted as a startup founder or worker for that matter, because you can adapt to the changes that may be hourly, could be daily, could be weekly. You could be changing and pivoting lots of different things on a very, very regular basis. So explore that. And the other thing to keep in mind is job security doesn't exist. Even if you're staff, even if you're contract, temp, permanent employee, there's no such thing. No one stays in a job for 30 years and lives to tell about it. Even people with 30 years of experience, then they're like, uh-oh, the company's going under. I have to go find another job. Do you think it's easy for them? Of course not.
Yeah.
Now, most people stay in jobs for 1 to 5 years nowadays. 5 years might be a really long time. That's normal. So you're going to have a lot of jobs, and that's okay. I've had plenty of jobs in my career. I've been hired, fired, laid off. Not a big deal. It's how you take it, right?
Yeah.
And it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. That's really, really important, because you control how you react to it. And you can be sad, you can be happy, but it's how you move forward that matters.
Yeah. Just sticking on that, I think I think we'll get to this, but a lot of Gen Z are going to go through this firing layoff cycle with this prospect of automation on the horizon. And so what would you recommend when, if you're a Gen Z, you've just gotten the letter, you're fired, you're laid off, you know, how do you light that fire under your ass? How do you not get emotional, procrastinate, be all nihilistic and existential? How do you reorient yourself in the midst of that crisis?
Yep. So what I do is I refocus my energy. So you're going to have a lot of frustration, angst, anger, happiness, joy, whatever that, whether you liked, you didn't really like the job, or you hated the job and you wanted to run away as fast as humanly possible, or it was your dream job, and then, oh my gosh, my dream job has disappeared, my dream is dead, right? So any of those, and anything else that you might be feeling, what you do is you refocus that energy to finding the next one,
Yeah.
right? And so I I can remember the last time I was laid off. It was they were laying off a certain percentage of the company, and I was really frustrated. But that drove me to making more money that single month than I ever had at that time, and that also propelled me to getting noticed by the top companies in the area, because I was doing amazing work, and reaching out to them too, because there is no reason why you shouldn't be touching base and networking with the top companies in your market, whatever that happens to be, whether it's in your region, or like at the time I was a journalist, right? I was a photojournalist, and I got laid off from a paper that was basically going under, right?
Sure.
And almost all of them, actually, almost every single publication that I worked with no longer exists.
Really?
But I was seeing writing on the wall, right?
Right.
I was seeing that. I mean, I was working for newspapers. How many
What are
newspapers
those?
nowadays?
Yeah.
Right. I was also working for magazines, .com magazines, just to date myself for a second, right?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah,
And
that definitely dates you.
yeah, so you know where the .com went when, and where the
Yeah,
.com magazines went as well, right?
for sure.
They all vanished, right? Like pretty much overnight. So
Yeah.
so as soon as I left that, I went to a much better job, right? It paid me 3 times more, and it was great, right? So it's just a matter of, you know, what's the writing on the wall say? Like, make sure you're paying attention to what the market of whatever industry you're in, whether you're doing hospitality, whether you're doing newspaper journalism, whether you're doing podcasting, whether you're doing, whatever the business happens to be that you're in, right? E-com, marketing, whatever. And understand, in your market, in your region, is it thriving? Is it dying? Right? And that should be the writing on the wall that you're paying attention to, saying, The writing on the wall says it's dying. Maybe I should be shopping for another job. And don't procrastinate. You can, but then you're just going to get a pink slip one Friday and it's
Yeah.
be gone. The company's going to be evaporated and they'll be like, oh, no more paycheck. What do I do now? Well,
Yeah.
I delayed what I was supposed to do, right? I should be looking for another job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not leaning
Just
too hard.
yeah, 100%. It's what one of my buddies is actually, looking for a job right now. He's finding it very difficult. When you're in that search, how do you narrow it down? Like when you're looking for a job, is it something that is just going to pay the bills, or is it something that should be very passionate? You should be very passionate about, or is it something that the market is gravitating towards? How do you make that distinction?
Right. I think it also depends on what stage of life you're in. So if you're in survival
Okay.
mode, yes, you need to make dollars so you can survive and pay the rent or put food on the table, at least your table, right, in front of you, right. So there's survival mode at the very, very minimum, right, making sure that you have enough money to eat today, right, and pay some bills, right, as many as you can in a perfect world. And then there's iterations of that, where you can be thriving and working in your dream job and making a stupid amount of money, right, in a good way. So there's everything in between that too. So it really depends on what you need, right? But you need to realize, like, how much do I need to survive? How much do I need to thrive, right? And those are two different numbers there, and it's probably like not a $1 difference per hour.
Yeah.
Or it might be literally the difference between a four-figure salary
Mhm.
versus a six-figure salary, right?
Yeah.
You don't need to make a nine-figure salary necessarily, right? That's not very realistic. That might be a goal, in your lifetime, but that's not very sustainable long term. Most people don't do that very long. So
Yeah.
yeah, keep in mind what you actually need, and then what you want. It should be need, want, and then nice to have, right? So
Yep.
not everyone needs a Ferrari. Ferraris are nice, but do you really
Speak
need
for
one?
yourself.
Right, exactly.
Well,
There-
one of the things, so we've touched on startups, we've touched on academia, we've touched on what to do when you're job insecure, or actually you've said that everybody is job insecure, and so make sure that you're aware of that. Make sure you're looking for the writing on the wall in the metaphorical sense. One of the things, and one of the unfortunate things about my generation is um, our desire for internet fame. And so we see a lot of people abdicating post-secondary. We see a lot of people not wanting to develop their social intelligence, their emotional intelligence, their, I guess you can call it technological intelligence, just as a very broad word. And they're just going to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and spending all of their time, money, and energy trying to achieve some sort of digital influence. Now, for someone like, let's say, Mr. Beast, who spends an entire summer, 12 hours a day looking at thumbnails, looking at the intricacies of thumbnails, sure, completely deserves it. But for the average Gen Z who wants to amass 60,000 followers on TikTok and then get sponsored, is this a viable approach to life? Is this something that you would recommend? Should you approach this with caution? Is there some beneficial are there some beneficial skills to be acquired in this pursuit? What are your thoughts on this trend or this kind of fad for Gen Z to just become an influencer and then get sponsors and that's it? That's your skill set.
Right. So there is a limited skill set if you think about it, right? Because the platforms
Yeah.
change. There's more and more platforms coming out on occasion, right? That are popular or die off, right? The MySpaces of the world, and there it's a choice, right? So there's back to your point of the speakers versus the doers, right? So if you're a doer on one of the networks, the social media networks, and and you're getting the views and you're getting the sponsorship, great, good for you. That's awesome. Will that be sustainable long term, meaning decades? Probably not. The other, so what's next after that, right, is the question, right? And because the what's next should be your question all the time, even if it's not your success of, well, either you don't start, right? That's how most ideas die, is they don't start executing.
Yeah.
The second one is you start and then you fail within, let's say, 6, 12, 18 months because you tried, you paid, whatever to get, lots of content created, et cetera, edited and moderated and pushed out and all that fun stuff. And then there's the few, let's be honest, the few people like Mr. Beast and a handful of others. I'm going to say there's a few hundred, maybe a few thousand that come to mind, right? That are really, really good at what they do, and they're niche, right? They're very niche, and they're really good at it because they have staff, right? They hire people. They don't do it alone, right? I don't do it alone. I don't edit my podcast anymore. There's no reason for me to edit my podcast. It doesn't bring me value, right? But in the beginning, if you don't have the money, you're doing everything yourself. You're learning yourself. So the learning of how to do it, and at least the attempt to do it, totally valid. You should try it, and see how much hard work it actually is, right?
Yeah.
Of putting out, and it's not hard work to post one time or daily, right? Or hourly, maybe. But what about for a year? Every day, right?
Yeah.
Or for 10 years or 12, right? Can you do it and come out with original content that people will continue consuming and keep the viewership, right, up? Because then you're great, you're doing great. But I guarantee you it's a lot of work. And almost every influencer that I know has a staff, a significant staff, and they spread it across the world because for a variety of reasons, including time zones, to do the work for them, a lot of the work, where they might be the face and the voice that you hear, but that's it. The rest is done by someone else.
I just wouldn't recommend going down the influencing route for most people. I mean, I was talking to my partner and I was just talking about how there's even AI influencers now, like Lil Michaela. I hadn't even heard of this like technological development where there are artificial intelligence influencers that have amassed hundreds of thousands to millions of followers, and it's even influencing is being, rendered automated by artificial intelligence. So speaking of AI, we touched on ChatGPT and Bard in the educational sense, but just in terms of where AI is today, are technologies like ChatGPT and Bard instigating this automation apocalypse, or is AI being revolutionized? What are your thoughts on that?
So it is an evolutionary step, right? ChatGPT or GPT-3 to GPT-4 to GPT-16 eventually, right? It's just an evolutionary step, and it's just one technology out there, just like Bard, right? It's going to evolve, and it is a disruptor. To your point, it is a small revolution because it's finally something we can touch without having a PhD in data science or machine learning, etc., to start using ourselves, right? But it's still fairly experimental, and it has plenty of challenges, right, to using it, to getting proper output of the correct answer or the correct image that you requested, right? Because again, if you don't know how to use it, it's not going to put out what you want, right? So the challenge is asking better questions, right? Being very creative, which machines can be creative to a degree. Yes, they can, but they have to be prodded by humans, right? And it starts with human data sets that humans created for the most part. Yes, there'll be avatars and actors in the very near future that are completely AI avatars. I use them on a regular basis. I use
Really?
avatars. Yes, there's no reason why you shouldn't. So I can have an avatar, replace me with my face if I want to, or someone else's face. I can pick from hundreds of different profiles, age, race, ethnicity, etc., right? Um, Gender, etc., and eventually their clothing very shortly, and have them say anything I want, just about anything I want them to say,
Sure.
and then translate that into every single language in a few minutes.
So I just need to ask right now, am I talking to the actual Henrik or am I talking to an avatar?
You're talking to the real Henrik right now.
Okay, I was going to say. Sure. No, please continue. Please continue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So imagine the power of that, and
Yeah.
that's going to come soon to Hollywood, because Hollywood's already using this technology too, because it only makes sense. They used to spend years creating CGI images and things. Then, one person in their garage, quite literally, will create a better version of it in a few weeks. Now it's days, right? So that time frame is just shrinking every time that people look at a new movie, and it's getting better and better in quality. So you can already not tell when it's a human versus not. We've already passed that Turing test. For voice, we can clone someone's voice. If I've already cloned my voice and my being, like there, you literally asked, but yes, this is me, because there is a version of me where I don't change very often, but but
Sure.
there is a version of me where it's 100% avatar, and
Whoa.
I could lose my voice tomorrow forever, and I could still type what I want to say, and it'll say it with my voice, right? So there's a benefit to that for accessibility, for scalability, for automation, to put out content, right? There's so many different reasons for this to be beneficial. Now, granted, it does start in the nefarious, right? All of this got popular because it became nefarious first. And then from the
Yes.
nefarious, people learned, wow, you could do that with it? That's amazing. But I could do all these amazing good things with it. And that's exactly how it evolves every single time. If you look at technology in the past, that's exactly how it's evolved. It's used by the military. Then, whoa, GPS, that's really helpful for everyone,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Well,
um,
speaking of a technology that's, accessible, scalable, and, causes a lot of automation and that people are very fascinated by, but is a complete disruptor, blockchain. And I feel like artificial intelligence right now is going through a cycle that is very similar to what happened in the crypto industry between 2017 and 2018, where there was just a massive amount of money poured into the industry just off of the premise of these technologies are interesting, let's just revolutionize it. So just for the average Gen Z, what is blockchain? What are your thoughts on the future of blockchain?
Sure. So blockchain is basically a digital ledger technology. So a ledger is just debits and credits in the very boring accounting sense. Money coming in, money going out, that kind of very, very simplistic idea. It's digital. Often it's public, meaning everyone can see that ledger, and it's basically a technology. So it can be used for not just money, like not just cryptocurrency, which has been one of the more popular forms of blockchain at this point, like Bitcoin, right? That was the grandfather of cryptocurrency. But it's well beyond the uses of just cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is going to continue existing. It's having a little winter right now due to a little three-letter company named FTX
Yep.
that kind of had, and they weren't the first nor last to have basically fraud happen, and there there's going to be more of those, because it's very easy to defraud people, because there's a thing called greed, right? And people like to hear, oh, you're making money on this? Well, I'm going to jump in at the highest possible price too. That sounds like a great idea. Bad, right? And then the hype cycle, which it basically has been, it's been for if you look literally at the entire history of Bitcoin, it was two, maybe three big hype cycles, and lots of people made money, and even more lost money.
Mhm.
And uh, there's over like 10,000 cryptocurrencies, right? And a lot of them die. Like you can have Henrik coin tomorrow, right? If I wanted to, but why? Well, if I'm greedy and I want to pretend that it has value, and you recognize that it has value, pretend maybe, sure, you could do that. But realistically speaking, blockchain has probably a bigger future that is not heard of. It's used for KYC and AML, so anti-money laundering and knowing your customer by the financial industry, which needs it. And they're basically laying people off because it's much smarter and much faster to get your transactions, like your loans, done and things like that, than humans going, yeah, I went through that checklist. A machine can do that, and
Yeah.
blockchain can do that even more securely, in at least on paper. So some banks and some financial industries are using it actively. They're just not really talking about it that much, because people are afraid of blockchain to one degree or another, or they're really,
Yeah.
really interested in it in the crypto currency sense. But to your point, it is following the same hype cycle, where you hear, uh, oh, there's new AI technologies, but unless you can literally like use it, uh, and buy it, or use it on a regular basis, like right now, AI, not many of them are being purchased; they're being used, right? And that's the
Yeah.
challenge. So a lot of money is going into them, even more than when blockchain was popular, and a lot of money was going into that a few years ago, like literally 5, 10 years ago. It was tons and tons of money, billions of dollars. Every single financial institution has put money into it. Now AI is the hot item, right? And because there's major players that are engaging into it because it makes a lot of sense. And now some of them are trying to play catch up because the non-public companies have been thriving, right? Because they didn't have the bounds of being a public company, of the scrutiny, right? Of being seen, and doing naughty things, that potentially speaking with AI, because they could experiment, and if if something went wrong, no one would barely notice. So so you can use things like Dali and ChatGPT and a few others, and see and kick the tires and see, like, does this output anything that is helpful? Can I learn how to use it better? Yeah, there's tons of tutorials on it online of how to use it better, right? And how to get better output. So try it, right? That's what I would encourage people doing. Buying into it, well, if you want to invest in your future and learn how to code and build those things, absolutely. If you have an idea of what AI should be doing for other people, right? Try it. That's
Sure.
exactly what you should be doing, especially if you're learning something now and you want to learn something that's going to be very useful. It's not just about ChatGPT or Bard or whatever, because those are going to be like typewriters in about 5 years, right? Uh,
Mm.
it's going to evolve really, really fast. It's evolving faster than most developers can understand. So it's
Yeah.
picking your lane, right? Your road, your path, of what you want to learn. Like, learn Python and SQL and whatever, if you want to be a programmer, and learn how to do that. If you're not into programming, if you're not into math, if you're not into engineering, pick another path that but challenge those comfort zones. And it's okay that there's not like lined out and hasn't existed for 100 years.
Just closing the loop on the blockchain topic, I remember one of the most fascinating people, Daniel Schmachtenberger. He was talking about using blockchain as, so he talked about a self-driving electric vehicle on a blockchain so it disintermediates from an actual company and becomes a Commonwealth resource. And that's one thing that I think Gen Z is, or can be rather, very adapted to, is taking these technologies, and Gen Z are called the digital natives, taking these technologies and then applying them to the world in a way where no other generation can. I feel like we are fundamentally missing out on that creativity that young minds offer. Uh, they're just focused on, again, a certain cryptocurrency community uses the term, we're all going to make it. But, you know, it just seems like a lot of, as you were talking about, a lot of money is just being lost and a lot of greed is being pounced upon. So just sticking with cryptocurrency, is it an overhyped technology? Can you see use cases for cryptocurrency as someone that? Go ahead.
It is overhyped, yeah, because where can you use it? Which stores accept it right now, right? Not many, right? I know that the millionaires, the cryptocurrency millionaires that have piles of it, and the way they use it is with gift cards. That's if the organization they want to spend money on doesn't offer gift cards, they can't buy it.
But is this something I've heard a lot of people say that crypto is useless just because you can't spend it anywhere. But isn't this just a step that needs to be taken by people who want to adopt cryptocurrency? In El Salvador, you can pay with Bitcoin in a lot of places. I'm pretty sure Gucci allows you to pay with Bitcoin. Not that you should pay with Bitcoin, but just as an example.
Yeah.
So why is the inability to pay with a lot of cryptocurrencies in your mind representative of it being overhyped?
Well, it's the acceptance of the currency form, right? Taking this credit card versus that credit card, taking this cryptocurrency versus that cryptocurrency, but it's also the stability of or the value of it, right? That varies quite wildly, and that's why there were some companies that are like, yeah, we accept Bitcoin. It's like for a pizza. It's like, okay, it's gonna be a very expensive pizza, I assume. Which with Bitcoin was a pizza.
Yeah, I think May 22nd, 2010.
Yeah, for 600 Bitcoin.
Was it 600? I thought it was 10,000.
It might have been, yeah.
Okay.
So, but it was so obviously it wasn't at the value of today.
Yeah, for sure.
Either way,
for sure.
Yeah. But so it's the fluctuation of the currency, which made it lucrative because if you accepted it when it was low and then traded it when it was high, great. Everyone makes money and everyone gets what they want. But the stability of it is a concern, right? And it sounds like a get rich quick scheme, honestly, if you think about it. When we all know that these don't work. It doesn't work that way. Like you don't buy into Bitcoin one day and then sell it the next day for billions of dollars, or even millions.
So even Bitcoin in your mind is a scam, because in my mind I separate Bitcoin out from the rest of the cryptocurrencies, because as Michael Saylor says, it's technically crypto property. But in your mind, Bitcoin is still a scam, and it still shouldn't be touched with a 10-foot pole.
If you can't buy into it, I would say no. If you can afford it, like Michael Saylor, right? Because he's a billionaire, so he can afford a few.
Sure.
And he's a proponent, right? He's part of that hype cycle. Let's be honest, too, right? So when Elon or when Michael Saylor or whomever talks about it in a positive way, saying it's going to go up, it's going to go to 10,000, it's going to go to 100,000, it's going to go to infinity, to the moon. It's like I mean, it's very hard to regulate is the other challenge, and it was designed that way, and the government doesn't like it that way, of course, because it goes against the central bank, right? It goes against the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and all the other countries, so because they can't control the currency. When it first came out, I was like, so when is this going to be on the foreign exchange? Because it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense to be on the foreign exchange because it should be. It's not bound to a country though, right? But it's a different currency. But it fluctuates so rapidly. The dollar and every other currency out there don't fluctuate that fast, and
Mhm.
it's absurdly expensive too for a lot of them, right? Because who can buy whatever cryptocurrency is worth right now, uh, like Bitcoin. Not many people have the money to spend on it, and they shouldn't necessarily leverage it unless it makes a lot of sense. And it's a speculative investment.
So what I'm kind of gathering is that Gen Z and their use of technology is very immature, just as a broad word or a loose word. And it makes sense that Gen Z grew up with technology, grew up in technology in some sense.
Mhm. And
They're
they
very
will continue
young,
to. Mhm.
and their experience will again shift and mold as they get older. So, what do Gen Z need to thrive and succeed at this very moment? Do they need to take a major step back and look at, the world through a different lens? Do they need to continue to use technology, but just in a slightly different way? What are your thoughts on what the average Gen Z needs to lead a
Yeah.
fulfilling and successful life?
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. So I think self-awareness. It starts with self-awareness, right? And you need to realize like what's happening around me and to me, right? Uh, and what do I have control over? Because what you have control over is very little if you realize. You have control over what you do and how you react to things, right? And what you do for work and at school, right? And what your productivity level is to a degree. Um, Getting out of your comfort zone is another thing, as we talked about. Pushing yourself to learn new things, right? At least understanding what it's about, right? And is it for you, right? Based on your how much risk you want to take, how much you want to push your comfort zones, that kind of thing. And then remaining curious. I think curiosity has helped me throughout my life. Always remaining curious, willing to learn, willing to understand, willing to discuss and talk about things openly with anybody. It doesn't matter who they are. And so understanding their perspective of things, because that's very, very enlightening. I did this as a journalist and I continue to practice it today, just understanding like where are they coming from? What are they trying to get to? Right? Trying to understand their journey and their goals, right? And then talking to people with your voice. That's super important. Not your thumbs, not your fingers, but so not in a chat room or via texting, but literally using your words. That's
Mhm.
super critical because that's the only way you're not going to get overwhelmed when you talk to someone is by practicing speaking to other people. That's super
Okay.
important. I can't emphasize that more than anything else. You should not be overwhelmed by anything, honestly. Some things are really annoying, and some things you have no control over, and you can ignore them for the most part, right? If you don't have control over it, there's probably noise, unless it's a really big danger that you just need to run away from. And there aren't that many that are necessarily that prevalent. So just start talking to people, right? Just like what we're doing right now, and reach out to people, even if they're not in your same time zone. Or if
Yeah,
they
yeah.
are, yeah. Uh, I mean, COVID is if we learn anything from the last pandemic, is you can reach out to anyone, anywhere in the entire world, and have a conversation with them at any time, but just about any time, as long as they're awake, right? So
Yeah.
that's the main thing, right? I use that to absurd levels in the last 3 years, to the point that I'm 100% remote, and you can be too if you want to, or you can work, traveling the world if you really want to. I've already done that,
Yeah.
and well, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. I guess just the last question. I don't even want to ask this because you summarized it so beautifully, but just in case there's a different answer, this is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. And so, what advice do you have for Gen Z around the world in different time zones to lead a successful life in a dynamic world that is technologically driven?
Yep. Make sure you talk to other people with your voice. That's the most important thing, because if you learn how to communicate, you can get anything done. It's not about the money. It's not about what's the latest interest or hype cycle or whatever. It's about communicating with people the rest of your life.
I love it. Henrik, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where can people find you on social media?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter. I'm on HGG 101. I'm on henrikdegyor.com. That's HENRIKDEGYOR.com. That's my main website where you can find all my books, all my podcasts. I have a blog there, and I reference my other blogs as well, and lots of other things that I do on a regular basis. And you can also reach out to me if you want to talk to me as well that way.
Sure. We'll link everything in the description. Once again, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Gen Z Diplomat podcast. To support it, please like the video, leave us a comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and leave us a follow on our Spotify page. Also, please check out HENRIK'S links in the description. That is the best way to support our guest for being on the show. I firmly believe that the more we talk about what future we want, the more likely we are to build a future that we deserve. Thank you for listening to this episode, and hope to see you in the future editions of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast.